Hello, everybody, and welcome to another lesson that I've been really looking forward to from the School of Inner Beauty. And we are joined today by my dear friend, Hilary Bromberg. Welcome, Hilary.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone.
It's awesome to have you here. I will tell everybody right now what Hilary just told me, and that is that she is quite pregnant. And because of that, there might be some pee breaks. So if you guys see me do this and that seems weird, we're just going to be pausing so that we can honor the bladder.
Sounds great. Thank you.
So I guess before we dive in, can you just tell us a little bit about you and just a little bit about your background? I mean, you have a pretty impressive repertoire.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I've been a lot of places. So I actually started off in cognitive neuroscience. So that was what my training was, it's a multidisciplinary field, which basically tries to understand who we are, why we do what we do, and pulls from a lot of different disciplines, everything from psychology to philosophy to anthropology, computer science, psychology, cognitive science, neuroscience. So it's really going from a neural level to a sociological level. So I spent some time in academia, and then I was like, okay, I'm done with the ivory tower. This is it's too rarefied. It's not where I want to spend my life. I was at MIT and Harvard and all this stuff. I'm like, okay, there's a bigger world out there. So I left academia and shifted into marketing, actually, which it's basically cognitive neuroscience, but applied. So you're trying to manipulate people to do what you want them to do. And so I did that for a while in New York, in the city, and eventually just got really, really fed up, really frustrated trying to sell things that I didn't personally believe in. Because at the same time, I was going through a process of awakening. I was doing a lot of yoga. I was getting into vegan stuff, which I believed was the best way to eat at that point. Just shedding a lot of stuff that had been with me, and we're going to kind of get to in this talk, actually. So at some point I'm like, okay, I'm done. So I left New York and I moved to the desert in a yurt and wrote a novel, really trying to make sense of our civilization and what's wrong with it and what needs to change. It was a radical feminist dystopia. So I did that, published that, and then moved to Seattle, where I merged a lot of stuff. So I was working at a branding agency, branding and marketing, but only with sustainability-oriented clients. And this is still a lot of what I do today. So I will only work with people who are trying to improve things. So I do a lot in food, wellness, personal care, a lot of organics, regenerative agriculture, basically trying to move things forward as much as possible. Along the way, I actually started a paleo company, the largest online paleo site, Barefoot Provisions, which is how we met, Camille, through the paleo community, which was just, it really just tapped into a lot of stuff that I was interested in. Right now, I'm writing a book, which is sort of it's nonfiction, but it's really all about how to get to a better place by reconnecting with our ancestral selves. And we'll be touching on a lot of the themes from the book in this talk that I'll be giving today. So that's my background, sort of in a capsule.
No big deal.
Yeah.
I can't, like, knowing you, I've known you from, Barefoot Provisions and forward, but I can't even imagine you in any sort of buttoned up cultures.
Oh yeah, I know.
Like at the academia, the marketing agency in New York City, all of that seeming conformity seems much unlike you.
Very much. Yeah. I mean, when I left New York, I had like a closet full of like black pantsuits and black heels. And I donated them all to Dress for Success. If you know about it, it's like, helping, homeless people or people with, underprivileged, like they've got the uniform they need to do what they need to do then. I'm like, okay, I'm never going near this again. Just kind of let it all hang out, just got away from all that stuff. But it's definitely been a journey. It was an intense journey to get rid of all that. And that's, a lot of what I'm going to be touching on. It's like just all the things we need to do to get through that. Yeah.
All right. Well, I am so excited about this. I just sort of peeked at your slides as we were getting ready, and you've got some provocative slides. So I want to know all about what's behind those.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, there's some intense imagery in here. Yes. Yeah, this is a very, I've given versions of this talk before, and people have been, crying, and it's a very intense, emotional talk. So just be prepared. There's a lot behind this, from my own personal experience that I think a lot of people can relate to as well.
Totally. And for those of you who might be listening right now just to an audio version, I can already tell you might want to go back to the module and actually watch the whole video with the slides at another time.
Okay, great. Okay,
let's do it.
So let's get started. So from patriarchy to porn culture, right? We hear a lot about patriarchy these days, but what really is it? And so I'm going to be going into a history, a long view history, back to hunter-gatherer times, to really understand how we got to this place. Because we're in this place now where we really hate our bodies. We're in a place of incredible self-loathing. And really, in order to heal and thrive, which is what we need to do, we need to understand how we got here. So that's what I'm going to be doing. So let's talk about where we are now. I'm going to start with a snapshot of our pretty sad modern predicament, which is probably very familiar to most of you. So there's tons of statistics out there. I mean, most people know this from first-person direct experience, but we can also just, if you look at just constant stats that are coming out, most women hate their bodies across the board. We hate the way we look. There's so many depressing statistics out there. Like literally 97% of women are unhappy with their bodies. 80% of 10-year-old girls have been on a diet. 50% of girls like 3 to 6 years old are actually worried about being fat. I mean, can you imagine a toddler is like concerned that she's fat? This is really, it's debilitating, and it affects everything that we do. We're seeing what happens by college years. 25% of college students are struggling with disordered eating. And we've got body shaming that's huge. It's rampant, especially with social media now. People are so profoundly affected. 94% of teen girls have been body shamed. Even first graders are getting in on the act super early. So basically, we're in this situation where we hate our bodies, and the people around us are really, really critical as well. And this is not just women who are affected by this. All of this is really on the rise with men as well. So we have literally 82% of men who want to change something about their bodies. Really just a terrible place. And it goes even beyond compulsive dieting and eating disorders. It goes really, really, really deep into a place of self-harm and self-mutilation. And I mean, this is serious. It's more pronounced among girls, but everyone is experiencing this. And kids are just, they're cracking, self-harm. It's a huge and growing problem. So 20% of young people at least engage in self-injury. We know that there's more because this is not something people want to talk about. There's a lot of shame around this, and it takes many forms: cutting, ripping, burning, picking, pinching. There's so many ways that we're hurting ourselves. And so why are we doing this? If you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, like, from what might be an adaptive behavior, it's not adaptive to make yourself less attractive, less healthy, right? And it's not a sign of pride. People don't wear these as badges. People are really ashamed about self-mutilation. They try to hide the scars, years later. And it's not a rite of passage. Some traditional cultures will do scarification, branding, piercings, things like that. That's not what this is. This is a sign that something is really, really wrong. We're in a pretty dark place. So we've got this huge problem here, right? So we've got these images that we're bombarded with. This is, Victoria's Secret, the perfect body, right? And this is just the imagery that we have every day. But we're not going to fix it just by saying, okay, well, let's look at different ads, right? And these women maybe have a little more body fat, than a Victoria's Secret model, and they're selling, firming cream, right? That's, telling us that we're not firm enough. So, the media steps in and tries to fix things, but that's not really going to really going to help in a deep way. And yeah, you can look at Pinterest affirmations all you want, but it's not really going to get to the root of the problem. These things are hurting us to the core, and you could be, you can tell yourself these things, but it's not really going to get in deeply. So in order to understand how to really fix these problems, we need to understand how we got here in a really deep way. So I'm going to take you on this whirlwind tour now of a side of history that people don't really talk about a lot, but it's really important to understand who we are. Because we're in this zone now, the national conversation, global in some way, it's all about patriarchy and toxic masculinity, right? We hear these words thrown about all the time. Crush the patriarchy, there's a recent Gillette ad about toxic masculinity. It got a whole backlash. So people are aware that there's something happening, but they don't really understand what they are, which can, lead to a lot of problems and just misunderstanding. And so what I'm really trying to do here is shine a spotlight on the origins. So what is patriarchy? How did we get to this place? Because we really want to be able to transcend it. So I want to go backwards, way, way, way back. And there's a lot of really interesting data from anthropologists that tells us a lot about what the ancestral environment was like. So let's go back to hunter-gatherer times before agriculture and talk about what we know. So we were deeply connected to the earth and its natural rhythms. That was just how we survived. We had to be connected to the earth. And we lived in these tribes that were very egalitarian. So, yeah, there was some division of labor. If women were pregnant or breastfeeding, they weren't going to be doing as much of the big game hunting. We also know that women provided at least, sometimes up to 80% of food for a tribe by gathering, but also by catching smaller animals, by doing a lot of smaller hunting, and even by participating in hunts sometimes. So there, and also women were the ones who developed technologies like pottery and herbal medicine and textiles. So we really had a place where, it was not that, women were just, less than in any way. There's some mythology, men fed everyone by hunting and women, took care of kids. It wasn't that way at all. Everyone was contributing. We also know that tribes were matrilineal and matrilocal. And that means that you basically had strong maternal figures in tribes, and that was what determined where people lived. So, we know this because by looking at, there's some really interesting evidence from like mitochondrial disbursement patterns that we can look at, anthropologically, who stayed in one place and who moved around. And so from this, we know the men would go off and move to other tribes. So you had a really strong matriarchal culture. And really importantly, and I'll keep stressing this later, this isn't to say that women were in charge or above men. That's not a healthy place to go to either. It's saying that we were in an egalitarian partnership-based culture where everyone contributed and everyone was valued. And, if you look at the earliest objects of worship, they were female. Women were revered as magical givers of life, super important to be, contributing to, creating more people, helping the species perpetuate. And there was a lot of magic and a lot of sacredness around women. We see tens of thousands of these goddess figurines in sites all over the world, really pointing to some, incredible, cross-cultural similarities and something that was very deep in terms of actually, seeing women as powerful and potent, and a lot of the earliest goddess myths that we can trace were reverent of women and nature, and the two were often merged. So women were seen as really powerful, seen as creators of the earth. Gaia, these were the earliest myths that people had. And that's our distant history. And it was very, very connected to nature, and not, women were not demonized at all. But then things shifted. So agriculture came in the Neolithic Revolution, and everything changed. So we went from hunter-gatherer, gatherer-hunter societies to a much more agriculture-based society, and everything changed. Social systems, attitudes, the way we were organized, everything just completely shifted. Now, so this didn't happen overnight. It's really important to point that out. It took a couple thousand years for cultures to shift. But it was the biggest shift in human history. You can pinpoint it to, from 10,000 to 5,000 years. We made the shift from agriculture, from hunter-gatherer to more horticulture to more agriculture. And it was massive, profound. So these are some amazing books that I would recommend all of you read. Really, really powerful in terms of helping us understand what happened with this shift. And they're mapping out this part of history that most people just never learn about. And, in all my years of formal education, no one was ever talking about this stuff. But basically, all of this stuff forms the basis for so much of what we believe and how we act. And just to give you a distillation about what these books are talking about, basically they're tracking. So you had horticulture, you had populations growing, and the structure of our society was changing. So agriculture, what did that mean? It meant that you had surpluses. You had all this grain all of a sudden. It wasn't just immediate return, it's called, where you're hunting and gathering for stuff that you need now or in the near future. So you had all these surpluses, and then you had the ability to hoard. And when you have hoarding, you have stealing. So people are starting to steal from one another. It's a totally different mentality. These are the roots of capitalism today, basically. So all of a sudden you have land ownership and private property. There was no such thing as private property, but, if you're doing agriculture, you need to make sure that, you're owning that land, that no one else is going to take it. So all of a sudden, then you have a really labor-intensive process. When they've looked at hunter-gatherers, you see that, they might have spent 4 hours a day kind of doing their, gathering food and doing work and stuff. But, there's a lot of leisure. But with agriculture, it was super labor-intensive, and you needed tons of people to work the field, so that you needed a lot of children all of a sudden. And you also needed male heirs with guaranteed paternity, so you could pass along your wealth. So basically, if you don't know who your kid is, if it could be anyone in the tribe, that's no good. So you need to know, okay, this is my son and he will take my land. So, it used to be more of a polyamorous free love situation in hunter-gatherer tribes, but all of a sudden things shifted. Men were stronger, physically stronger. Sexual dimorphism, which is men and women being different sizes, is a thing. And that leads to a lot of these issues where men are the ones who are kind of defending and attacking, and you have women becoming property all of a sudden to steal. That's what would happen in these early horticultural days. You'd go into a village and you'd, kill the men, steal, rape the women and children. Basically, that was what happened. Women were basically bred like livestock. How many kids can you breed for me so that we can, do as much agriculture as possible, have as much food as we can. So all of a sudden, this is a major shift. So nature used to be this life-giving mother, and then it shifted to this resource. And we hear this, every time I hear the word resource today, I just cringe because, nature is to be conquered and used all of a sudden. It's basically just, you have the land, you take it, you plow the hell out of it and basically try to, use it as opposed to being in balance in a state of, incredible, nurturing systems and, making sure, there was early horticultural stuff that happened that wasn't necessarily bad. You see indigenous tribes going in and doing some nurturing to the land and making sure that things are, maybe in harmony. The plants are planted near others that can support them. So that, I'm not saying total 100% state of pure, raw, wild nature where you don't control things, but a level of control came in that became really, really debilitating, to the earth and to our psyches. And it was all happening at once. And then mythology starts shifting as well. So instead of worshiping the goddess and the earth and the fertile soil and all that, it all of a sudden started being about sky gods up in the air, So instead of having this reverence for the spirits of the natural world, it was all about these gods in the sky. And some of these early myths were pretty intense, cruel. So you saw egalitarian and matriarchal. That was the way it used to be, gave way to hierarchical and patriarchal. And that was like the major shift that happened historically. We know this is, just fact. So you saw agricultural surpluses grow. And then you also saw, livestock herding. That added another way to concentrate wealth. All of a sudden, animals were kind of part of your wealth.
How long ago was this? What's the
yeah, 10,000 years to 5,000 years was when you saw the shift. It depended where we're talking geographically, but just to root ourselves in history, that was kind of 10,000 years is often used as the marker. That's when agriculture started, but it was a gradual kind of from pure hunter-gathering to more of a horticultural system to agriculture. So by 5,000 years ago, that shift had really, impacted most communities around the world, although you still see, there's still some tribes today that are hunter-gatherers. But that's about the range. So you had these village raids, where basically, these men on horseback were coming along. They had Bronze Age weapons and wheeled chariots. You'd say, okay, we're going to kill all the men, rape all the girls. That's just standard operating procedure. And women's freedom at that point pretty much disappeared for the next 7,000 years. So we can look, because we have records of some of the earliest laws and codes that were drawn up at this time, like the Babylonians. They had the Code of Hammurabi. And so if you look and see what they said, women were basically sex slaves. That was it. And our worth was basically tied up in, virginity, fertility, and the ability to give sexual pleasure. That was it. That was just what women were for. That was what life was like back then. And so women were the property of their father. You were owned by your father, and then you were owned by your husband. Ownership. And if you got out of line in any way, you were punished. These were just the codes, right? So, and how would you get out of line? Like if you left the house too much, or didn't cover your head, or spoke up to some degree, or even if you got raped. And we see, some cultures today even perpetuate these things. And this is what we're seeing the echoes of. This is what we're living with, is the legacy of these earliest codes that came out of early agriculture. And women were punished really harshly. They were beaten, tortured, killed. It was really, really brutal. And so in the course of a couple thousand years, basically from hunter-gatherer time to full-on agriculture, we went from being equals to being slaves. Women did. And we're only now starting to recover from that. That's what we have to understand. This was thousands of years of intense, basically slavery, violence, brutality. And that's what we're living with today. So you did see, in this window of change, for some amount of time in Neolithic history, women were still allowed to be goddesses. So you see some really interesting, imagery from the mythology from kind of around this transition time in Egyptian and Babylonian, Greco-Roman cultures. You can see, sort of more of kind of a pagan goddess worship. Okay, women are still powerful. There's still some, something there, But then you got monotheistic religion coming along, and then everything got worse, and this is kind of, it's a joke, right? So much, it's like, you look at what kind of God was described in the Old Testament, and this was pretty brutal. There was a super clear hierarchy. God is above all, man is above woman. And so there was one God, and he was male and violent and wrathful. So a little later, Jesus came along, and that's a really interesting counterpoint, because he was very loving and egalitarian, and so were some of his disciples. It was totally antithetic to this vision. But by the early medieval period, the version of Christianity that came forward was very anti-women and very anti-pleasure. So this is a quote from St. Augustine, women should not be enlightened or educated in any way. They should, in fact, be segregated, as they are the cause of hideous and involuntary erections in holy men. So, St. Augustine and a lot of these other early Christian theologians, they were so horrified by the earthly human body. Can you just feel the self-loathing and everyone loathing there? It was like, okay, basically, it was taught that it was a sin to even enjoy sex when you were married. So sex was for procreation and nothing else. And this was exactly the mindset that set the stage for 2,000 years of shame and loathing of the human body. And this is our legacy today. Yeah,
well, it's funny to me, having been in the Christian church for half a decade in my 20s, is that, I didn't know any of this. I've certainly quoted him before. I think there's so much even of whatever the embedded Christian roots are that most of us just don't even realize.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, it makes its way in deep, right? We're brought into this, most of us from a very early age. And there's this, fear and loathing of the human body. And we're seen as somehow, we're these, sex is dirty and filthy, nudity is bad and wrong. It just becomes this part of us. And it's so hard to overcome this early programming. I think this is where a lot of S&M stuff comes from. People are kind of fetishizing this. Okay, is it good? Is it bad? And it's very hard to reconcile feeling so good about something that's supposed to be so evil. And so we're all kind of a little fragmented and trying to recover from this. So these are some more books if you're looking to really dive into these themes deeper. Riane Eisler also wrote The Chalice and the Blade, which I showed you before, and she extends it in Sacred Pleasure, Women in Nature. Susan Griffin she writes some amazing essays connecting women to the earth in a way that's actually, it's very rooted in our long history, and very, very empowering as well. It's not a bad thing to be connected to nature. Actually, it's the most powerful thing we can have. So you had this shift, right? During the Neolithic age, Earth Mother egalitarianism was replaced by violent exploitative monotheism. So women we were closer to nature just by the fact that, we bleed, we're messy, right? We give birth, all of these things. We are inferior to men, obviously. We are temptations to sin, and we are therefore evil, right? So we only have a couple of different ways we can be valuable. We can be a godly wife and give a man male heirs, or we can be a sinful prostitute. Prostitutes went back, historically a long time as well, and give a man illicit pleasure. So if you've heard about the virgin whore dichotomy, basically you're one or the other. And this is still alive and well today. You can look at, any media source, certainly, pornography or, just anything that's coming, just look on social media. You can see this virgin whore dichotomy alive and well today. So women are basically property, in this new model, in the Neolithic age. Women need to be hidden, beaten, silenced, and covered, and never educated. So we had this ancestral yearning for love and connection that preceded all of that, and it was totally distorted into dominance and coercion. And sadly, this is the legacy that we're living with today that we need to overcome. So if you look at Renaissance art, this is our window. This is the social media of their day. And it's pretty obvious why porn is so violent today. There's so much raping. It's just, it's just part of the imagery, part of the zeitgeist, so that's all we've known for thousands of years. And our sexual programming is totally sadomasochistic. Yeah, you've got idealized virgin imagery, right? But this is kind of the norm. This is what happened. You went in, you raped. So that's our programming. So think about what that means to have an entire segment of the population be slaves for like 7,000 years. Basically all women threatened with torture or death if you get out of line in any way. So you learn to be compliant and passionate, compliant and passive and helpless. And you learn not to speak up. You learn to do everything that you can do to please your captor, your master. You learn that you deserve to be treated like an object. You learn that you are an object, and you fall into a submissive trance where the desires of your captor, who's violent, become your own. And you learn to sexualize violence because that's your only context for sex.
Is this what, when you say rape culture, like we hear that a lot in the media, we call this then the roots of rape culture?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is where it came from. And so it's very frustrating when people say, oh no, we don't live in a rape culture. It's all fine. It's like, this is just history. No one questioned it. It was survival. If you go back empathically to living in these villages, I'm not blaming the men who were doing it. This was just the system they were in, in order to survive, it was kill and be killed. And so that was just kind of how it was. We grow up in a culture, right? And we're not taught to question what's around us. Nowadays we're in this postmodern era where we can make choices. Back then, all these thousands of years ago, this was just how it went. Raping was just Yeah, that's how it went. And even, we go back and look at, stories, videos, accounts from even, the 1950s or 60s, and you can see how things were even a lot rapier then. And that was normalized. So now we're in this era where finally we're saying, hold on, wait, this is wrong. This is wrong. And it goes all the way back. It goes all the way back to this stuff, just because that was culture back then. And it programmed us. It messed with our heads and gave us our sexual programming. So you saw this violence of women continuing for thousands of years. The witch hunts were really the epitome of this violence, because they killed anyone who was a threat because of their special powers. And what was happening there is, you still had women who were, serving as healers and midwives. Not everybody was kept down at all times, but if you had women who actually were in this role where they seemed to have some power, they were killed. So why, maybe they actually enjoyed sex. That was cause for killing women as witches, or they spent too much time with women, if they were gay, or if they spoke up too much. Or certainly lots of healers and midwives were witches and had dangerous powers. So you had this horrible era where it was basically over 100,000 women were killed, probably many, many more.
When was this? How long did this era span?
This was more medieval, 1200s, 1300s, 1400s. I mean, but it was going on, the Salem witch trials, in the 1600s,
right.
In the US. It was, it was continuing until very, very recently.
And so to be a witch, you sort of just said it, but to be a witch then is women who worship the earth, who use natural remedies,
yes,
who gather together.
Yeah.
And what else? What else was a witch?
Someone who seemed to enjoy sex.
Okay.
Who actually felt things physically and was expressive about it and sought out sex with people. Like wasn't just, this very chaste being. That it was about more than just producing heirs. Also women who seemed like they were gay and preferred to be with other women. That was a witch. Certainly anyone who was a troublemaker, anyone who was outside the patriarchal norm, basically.
Isn't it so fascinating what that has become as to like what a witch is in like our fairy tales?
Yeah.
The black, wearing the black, the pointy hats, the warty, ugly nose, the more like the hag.
Exactly. And she was demonized.
Riding around on a broomstick, just causing problems.
Completely.
That's what it's devolved to in fairy tales. It's still, that we still read and share with our children at times.
Yeah, absolutely. And you even see that in insults, like she's a witch, it's like, oh, that's bad, when really, or even, a lot of people, the way people talk about midwives today, even, some people and natural healers, it's just, there's so much condescension and they couldn't possibly know what they're doing. Right. I mean, you had midwives giving, helping people give birth successfully for so many years. And then the medical establishment just came in with their butchery and tried to destroy all that through, bludgeoning, patriarchal bludgeoning. I mean, it's pretty sad.
And now we have C-sections.
Oh yeah, exactly. Oh yeah. This is all very, I've been diving into all this being pregnant right now. And it's just so sad, really. It really speaks to how out of touch we are with our own bodies and with history. And, I've learned a lot that I just didn't know because we're not educated in any of this stuff. We're taught to trust, the man in his white coat, or, even if it's a woman in the white coat, it's still the medical establishment compared to something that's actually about listening to your body.
Right. The power the power being sourced from within versus the power being up and outside of you, which is exactly goes along with what you were talking about the transition of like worshiping nature and God being within to then going to God with God in the sky. It's like we just have carried that forth.
Yeah.
Like the power just being outside of us in the system that is not us. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really the heart of the shift, like, learning. And that's where we have to, I'm jumping ahead, but we have to learn to reconnect with ourselves and our own wisdom. And that's hard when we've had so many thousands of years of being alienated, and work, you know, what, you know, what you're doing now with the School of Inner Beauty, what so many women are now trying to do across the world and helping us reconnect to this deep stuff. I mean, this is the important work that we need to do right now, just to be whole as people.
And it's fascinating. I don't know, maybe you'll get, I don't want to take you off course from your,
it's all good.
your presentation, but, you know, understanding that, you know, science can confirm that we have traits passed down through our DNA, you know, the work, I think like Bruce Lipton and you know, some of the others that are now they're showing us that these imprints are passed down through the bloodline.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Yeah, there's a great book by Mark Wolynn, Wolynn. It's called It Didn't Start With You. Yeah. And he's looking just that at the epigenetic changes, you know, in terms of, you know, definitely if you starve a population, you see the implications, whether it's mice or humans, generations down the line in terms of metabolism, but it also affects your psychology. So trauma, intergenerational trauma is a real thing. And this is what we're talking about. So many generations of trauma, you know, women basically being, treated with incredible violence. And you learn and, you know, your genes change. And so what we're trying to do here is hard. We're trying to overcome something that's gotten programmed into us, as deep as our DNA. So, but the first step is awareness, right? So at least we have to understand what we're trying to overcome so that we don't pass that on to our kids, or we do that as little as possible. I'm dissing religion a lot, but, you know, the same stuff happened in science. Science was not really changing things, you know. So in the Victorian era, they finally stopped burning women at the stake, but, you know, this is Darwin, right? And he was pretty convinced of women's inferiority, you know, some amazing quotes, Victorian era, really not that long ago. The chief distinction in the intellectual powers of the two sexes is shown by man's attaining to a higher eminence in whatever he takes up than can women, whether requiring deep thought, reason, or imagination, or merely the use of the senses and hands. So if two lists were made of the most eminent men and women in poetry, painting, sculpture, music, composition and performance, history, science, and philosophy, with half a dozen names under each subject, the two lists would not bear comparison. And we may also infer from the law of the deviation from averages so well illustrated by Mr. Galton in his work on hereditary genius that if men are capable of a decided preeminence over women in many subjects, then obviously the average of mental power in man must be above that of women. So, you know, I mean, obviously Darwin
wrote this?
He wrote this. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, this was just how Victorians saw the world back then. You know, they were also racist, but, you know, it was very much, you know, a white man's world. And he basically was, you know, I mean, this is, you know, it's sexism. It's pretty obvious to anybody looking, you know, thinking, okay, why is this the case? Well, you've been slaves for all these thousands of years. You're not allowed to get an education. It's kind of hard to be preeminent, you know, in these fields when basically you're spending your entire life pregnant and having babies and locked in your house uneducated. you know, it takes a lot to get out of that. And certainly, you know, we do see exemplars of women in all these areas throughout history, but that's just not the norm, right? And and we're getting to a place of more egalitarianism today, but we're still dealing with this legacy, you know, in so many fields. And so this was just, you know, this was just the way he thought about it. And it's kind of, you know, it's really striking to say, okay, we're not all that far from this. You know, if you look at the bell curve and all these arguments about, well, men are just intellectually superior to women. That's just how it goes. It's like, oh God, can we stop this, please? You know, if you look at the differences between men and women as groups, they're a lot smaller than within a particular, you know, you take within a group of men or within a group of women. So, you know, you can't generalize about anyone's intellect or skills based on, you know, whether they have XX or XY chromosomes. And it's just super dangerous to go down this path. Because we're really,
Oh, and just having been so deep in academia as you were, I mean, I'm just thinking about so much of, you know, what we are taught in school and what is in, you know, what's in the textbooks. You went to some of the most prestigious schools in the country, but I mean, would you say that is also still the case, that in academia there is still this bias, or is that Is that shifting there?
Well, it's taking a different form now. So we're having these debates in very scientific language. And Darwin was just writing what he thought. So you have, Charles Murray, and who wrote the bell curve. And there's a lot of controversy right now. And the bell curve was what said basically, it was making a racist argument based on what I would consider some questionable IQ data, and basically saying certain races are inferior to other races. And people make those same arguments for men versus women. There was a whole brouhaha, if you heard about like Larry Summers, who got kicked out of Harvard. He was the president of Harvard for saying, making these claims that the reason why you don't see as many women in STEM, professions in math and science is because they don't quite get to these peaks if you look at the bell curve, men just are out there in these peaks and attain genius a lot more. And so there were some debates and, some scientists who I really respect were challenging him. And eventually he got booted because, it's just, from my vantage point, there's not a lot of scientific evidence to support this kind of thing. But Murray he's doing podcasts now. There's been this whole bell curve revival because we're in these weird times now where nobody knows how to talk about any of this stuff. And people are feeling very threatened by women who are coming to power and, Black Lives Matter and all that stuff. So all of this stuff, which I consider just racism, and sexism dressed in really shabby scientific clothing, it's all happening now. So, yeah.
I don't have as deep of an understanding on this topic maybe as you do, but isn't there some truth or validity to, like, let's say though in sciences where, because men and women are different and our gifts are different, like that, like if you take the average of, let's say, a male population, it's going to lend to having higher faculties in some areas and not because of a better or worse, just like, women are like in the nurturing fields, like nursing and education, that women may be more suited to that because we are biologically different, versus men being maybe more suited for things that derive more of those masculine traits and the concentration of use of that. That to me just sort of shows, and I know this to not go off on a tangent here, but we are biologically different. And so that lends to having gifts in different areas.
Yeah. And what you're raising is actually really controversial in terms of difference. Yeah. There's some books I actually talk about later on in this talk. I would recommend everyone read Delusions of Gender by Cordelia Fine. And she also wrote a book called Testosterone Rex. And she's a neuroscience, and she kind of really counters a lot of the difference literature. There's a ton of really bad science out there that shows differences between men and women. And the problem is it's very tainted by experimenter bias and also by cultural bias. And when you really go in and look, how different are men from women, it's very unclear because we're still wallowing. We have a lot of cultural baggage. So from a pure neurological perspective, what we see is that the differences between, if you take just a group of women, any two women from that group are going to be much larger than the differences between a random man and a random woman. So it's up in the air scientifically whether the differences, how significant these differences are.
Is it nature or nurture?
Exactly. And a lot of it can be culture. But what we do know is, populations are huge. You have a lot of people out there. And so if you're in a situation where you're saying, okay, well, there's not as many women engineers, there's plenty of people who could do that. And why are they not doing that? It's not like we just have such a finite pool. We only have 10 women out there who have the brains to be able to program. No, there's a lot of cultural influences. So I would say at this point, the science, there's a lot of bad science. The verdict is out, and men and women are a lot more similar than we are different. And even some of the research on hormones, if you read Testosterone Rex, can be really is on shaky ground. So, it's not the case that testosterone equals violence at all. You can actually see people being very violent with a low testosterone. I mean, it's fascinating. And the more you go down that rabbit hole, the more it's like, okay, talking about differences between men and women is about as, it's useful from a cultural perspective because here we are, but, is about as useful from a practical perspective as talking about the biological differences between Black people and white people, whatever there may be is, largely, very, there's physiological differences. Some people have more melanin in their skin than others. Obviously, from a biological perspective, there are differences, but right. To the degree that it actually influences, all, our brains and how we can function in the world, I think it's too messy out there, and it's not necessarily useful to start focusing on differences. I think we're at a point where we need to focus on harmony more than anything else. And I'll talk more about that later. But which isn't to say that we shouldn't be, okay, we have this legacy as women. Let's talk about it. Let's get it out there and then move to a place where people are a lot more fluid.
Well, but just thinking though, we talk about the similarities and the differences though, and there is like the practicality of child rearing, right?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Like, you're pregnant, it's your body that is capable of doing that. And then for, the optimal health of your child to be able to be with it, to breastfeed it for a certain amount of time. And I think that that's what I look to more, without getting into the weeds of some of these conversations that we just don't have the answers to, is to see that, to me, that we want to value that there are differences. And a lot of those differences do come down to being I don't know, I'm not, even as I'm saying it, I'm not saying that it's true, but, to not negate that for the healthy furthering of our society, that we want kids to be able to be with both of their parents, but there is a necessity of women being there always.
Absolutely.
And ongoingly. So it's an interesting conversation. And I definitely have heard some from both sides. But so to be able, I don't know, it is an interesting dance to me of being able to honor the differences between men and women and also seek to really unify. And that the conversation for me about even feminism, that's a loaded word, you might get into that later, but it can become a thing about, like reversing the patriarchy or the matriarchy coming up. But to me, as you said, it is about that we do have differences, and that we serve an equal function in the evolution of this world.
Exactly. And also having respect for those differences as well. You can take an extreme position and say, well, okay, women are exactly like men, so we should just go to work like the day after we have a baby or a week later and, give the baby up to daycare. And that's progress, right? And I would say, oh, no. Let's go back to biology here, and attachment parenting. And is it going to have an impact on me and what I do in terms of my creative production and professional production if I've got a baby, attached to me for 9 months? Well, yeah, but the culture doesn't respect that either. We're not at that place yet. So there are some really intense conversations to be had at that junction, because a lot of people say it's anti-feminist, right? And what are we doing saying that we need to go back to an attachment parenting place? We're going back, and yet, cultures that are more progressive, like in Scandinavia, it's like, 18 months maternity, and also, huge paternity leave. People acknowledge that that's a part of our life. And I think that's a whole other dimension that we haven't even begun to figure out how do you honor that so that kids can actually develop in a whole way rather than just being put in cages and neglected. I mean, that perpetuates. I mean, that's all, part of, we talk about Victorian times, that's a kind of, it's a whole other talk actually. But, our attitudes on parenting and child rearing, come from just a very destructive place. And that's another thing we need to reconnect with. And part of that, I totally agree, is honoring just biology. We are these animals that have this amazing power, and we have to honor that, and honor it not just through pregnancy, but beyond into child rearing. And so how do you talk about that? Because people, pregnancy is very much, our culture, it's all about, how cute a baby is and what clothes they're wearing and their nursery and putting them, all these superficial stuff. But I think we've lost touch with a lot of the deeper stuff, and that, to people who don't understand it, it can seem almost anti-feminist to say, let's return to a state of nature. But, I don't think it is. So.
I don't think so.
Yeah, no, neither do I. But okay, yeah.
I won't hijack you from your talk.
Yeah. No, this is, awesome stuff. So basically we're in this place, religion and science, there's just all this deeply sexist stuff. And, it's really scary that someone as smart as Charles Darwin wasn't able to identify like why you might have less women on his grand list that he's making. So, but things were starting to change for women in the Victorian era. It was getting interesting. So at that point you had first wave feminism. Right? You had suffragettes, you had women who are like, hold on, we should be able to vote. We should have rights. We shouldn't be property. You had enough people who were actually getting educated. And this was really scary for men. Talk about a scary time for men. This was terrifying for them. So you had this imagery starting of the Femme Fatale. And you had that. These are some really great books that go through. The book on the left, Idols of Perversity, it goes into art history and these visions of women, basically, in fantasy culture, turn of the century, from 1900s to the 20th century. So fantasies of feminine evil and fantasy culture. And then when you had the birth of the early film industry, in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, you had even more of this imagery. And so women were created as these femme fatales, and they were really dangerous because of their sexual power over men. So men created all these images, men were the ones, creating these films. And they created this image of this woman who was basically, she was a response to the terror that they had of actually losing power. Are we still on? I just heard the screen disappeared for a second. Yeah, we're good?
Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, good. Okay, cool. Yeah. So you had, female sexuality was really threatening. Women were really threatening. So men sexualized them in order to make it sort of more palatable. So this femme fatale imagery is something that's still alive and well today. You just have to, look at so many films, look at, websites, magazines, whatever. And you see that, there's a lot of this out there. And so the thing about a femme fatale is she's not actually a real threat, right? The real threat in early first wave feminism was we want power. We want to be able to vote and own property and all these different things. But they've sexualized her, and her power is all about seduction. So this woman now who has more power, she's basically a very demanding prostitute. And this is very clear from how she's portrayed. Men knew prostitutes, they knew that kind of imagery, and that was what they were building up as, okay, here are these evil women, right? And so, but what's really a threat, and you mentioned witches as hags with warts, the same sort of thing we see in depiction of early suffragettes. So women who want power and don't sexualize themselves, that's like the most threatening thing ever. So, 100 years ago, which isn't really that long at all, women were fighting just for the right to vote. It's very hard for people to imagine just the recency, especially younger people, that, you just weren't even considered a person. Your opinions did not matter. You did not exist. But look at how these suffragettes were portrayed, right? So nobody wants to marry them. They've never been kissed. They're ugly. They're not hot. And, in this kind of depiction, you can see this again and again today. It's just one of many memes. This was after the Women's March, after Trump got elected. So in one day, Trump got more fat women to walk than Michelle Obama did in 8 years. So it's like, okay, this meme went totally viral after the election. So if you went to the Women's March, you must be fat. There's this persistent image of the feminist, and she's fat and she's ugly and she's not attractive. What is she doing? She's not sexualizing herself. She's not buying into the prostitute aesthetic. And that is just crazy threatening to men. So that's really, really important. You have men who can only be comfortable with women if they sexualize themselves, which is to basically differentiate themselves physically and kind of make themselves into sexual objects. So we've gotten to this place today where our beauty culture is really a celebration of the prostitute aesthetic. And so here's some books that lay out this terrain. This book, A New You, this was the book that I wrote when I went into the desert a few years ago, in New Mexico. I was like, okay, I need to kind of get all this out there. And Beauty and Misogyny is a great book, just really looking at beauty culture, taking on plastic surgery and fashion and just how much loathing there is. There was a great documentary about Alexander McQueen, who was, he hated himself. He was a gay man who hated himself. So much loathing in there. It seemed like, he really hated women in a way, and he put women in these tortured things that went right into rape culture. If you look at the catwalks, it was a really, really interesting window into this exact phenomenon. But Sheila Jeffreys really did a great job just shining a spotlight on just how much self-loathing and other loathing there is in the beauty industry. And then Hope in a Jar is a great book if you're into just kind of, modern American history. So it took a look at the whole makeup and hair, all these industries which didn't exist before. It used to be, it was more about natural remedies, or, so there was, there's all these classic stories about how, women would smear arsenic on their faces to make themselves look paler. There are the things that we did, but then all of a sudden you had, capitalism and commerce and prostitute culture and the early film industry hitting up against each other. And all of a sudden you had this explosion of beauty culture and what was going on then. And, a lot of it for women was just trying to survive. It makes a lot of sense, right? If you're trying to survive in a certain world to get a job and they expect this of you, then you do it. So, before the early 20th century, prostitutes were the only women who wore makeup and dyed their hair. It was an indicator. That was how you knew it was a prostitute. So they were the only women who wore extra sexy clothing. And so, it was smart. If you're a prostitute, all this stuff hypersexualizes you. It exaggerates your sexual signals and gets you more business. But as women started leaving the home and entering the workplace and finally getting some power and independence, this was really, really, really threatening. Like the suffragettes actually prevailed. Women got to vote. Women are getting jobs now. And men were so scared. And so women sexualized themselves as much as possible, and it made them a lot less threatening because men knew how to deal with whores. They were very familiar with this category. And the prostitute didn't actually have any real power. And women loved the effect of wearing makeup and sexualized clothes. You could get men to, pay attention to you, do stuff for you, and they'd learned 7,000 years of slavery, right? So your only real value is in appealing sexually to men. That's it. It's not about anything else. It's not about who you are, or your intellect, your creativity, your energy, all these things. It's like, no. We're basically, the idea of being a sex object is internalized, as you said, epigenetically over many, many years. And so, of course, that's what we're going to do because it's all we know. And so this prostitute aesthetic carried on throughout the 20th century as more and more women are entering the public sphere. So Naomi Wolf wrote this classic book in 1990, The Beauty Myth, and it was great. She really called out what she called the professional beauty qualification, PBQ, which basically meant that for a woman to be taken seriously in the workplace, she had to sexualize herself. If you're showing up in a lot of professions, and you're not like in a full face of makeup and done hair and nails and, wearing heels, even, a skirt, that, you're not taken seriously. That's just kind of the reality. And this continues into the 1980s, working girl imagery, same stuff, and And even today, you've got these corporate uniforms that are extremely, tapping into the prostitute aesthetic, very, very sexualized. So yeah, we've come a long way. We're making tremendous progress here, but we're still stuck in some really retro scripts. So for example, we're not wearing corsets anymore, most of us, which is great because, they were totally damaging. They made, created.
How?
Yeah.
How do your organs even fit anywhere?
I know. It's really, you had a lot of organ damage. If you look at autopsies, like kidneys were totally degraded. It's really, and this was just what you had to wear when, it was just part of the uniform. And it's like, oh my God, this is horrifying. This is grotesque. How can, you even see ads, little girls were trained, they started them early with these corsets, and it's basically exaggerating all of your sexual symbols. It's hypersexualizing you the worst possible way. But, we've now got Spanx, right? Power panties, it's amazing, where's the power coming from there, and yeah, they don't damage your kidneys as much, but if you've ever tried to put them on or seen, there's some amazing videos on YouTube, like women just like, these are so uncomfortable. It's like wearing a straitjacket. I actually, I'm getting targeted now for everything pregnancy related. And I got, on Instagram. So I got targeted for like pregnancy Spanx. And it's like, oh no, this is like, I'm already more physically uncomfortable than I've been in my life. Now I'm expected to like,
suck it in.
Oh yeah, exactly. I have to be smaller, right? I have to smooth over, all the good fat that's accumulating to actually like feed this baby. It's like, no, that can't be there. We gotta be sexy mamas, It's like, yeah, pretty.
Oh yeah, one of the other teachers from the School of Inner Beauty program posted a whole thing about that, about this idea of this fit mama or fit pregnancy, and this whole culture of to be like on top of it during pregnancy means that, you're constantly exercising. You're, 4 or 5 days after you give birth, and you're able, like, one lady wearing lingerie again 4 days after childbirth. And you just, all of these ideas that are still coming through, like there shouldn't be any excess weight. Yeah. And that's somehow even, I don't know how that's even somehow healthy for a child, or if you want to be able to produce milk. And it's just crazy. And that is very much alive and well.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. I've been reading, in Japan, there's this cult of like the ideal aesthetic when you're pregnant is to be emaciated, like stick thin, but then have a bump. And like women are actually causing their babies like harm, brain damage, all kinds of just like physical problems, mental problems, because they're starving themselves to maintain this ideal. And it's pretty, pretty horrifying. So yeah. So here's some pretty gruesome images from foot binding. So it's pretty shocking. So you think, oh yeah, that was some weird little random thing happened in China very briefly. No. Literally 1,000 years of foot binding went on in China. You can still find women with bound feet today. It was only in the 20th century that people started questioning it all. So literally 50% of all women in China used to bind their feet, and all upper class women. It was a sign of status. It was a total status symbol to have little feet. This is 1,000 years. Just think about that. And men thought it was really hot. They sexualized it. And women were in such a submissive trance that they went along with it. They basically would destroy their own daughter's feet and cripple them for life. And so, okay, well, this seems pretty retro, right? But, here we are, and we really haven't come that far. I mean, in a lot of situations, high heels are still the norm. We still fetishize them culturally. I mean, things are shifting. I've seen shifts in the last 10 years, but it's still going on. Men are totally fetishize them. If you look at porn, that's part of the aesthetic. And this is basically one step away from foot binding. We know high heels are really uncomfortable. They're hard to walk in. We know they're bad for our feet and our entire body, but a lot of women still wear them. I used to wear them for years. It took me years of yoga to just get my like grounding and balance back and get my feet and all the tendons stretched out properly after years of, okay, this is it's what you wear, right? There's even what's called Cinderella surgery, where people get toe slimming and toe shortening and, get foot padding injected, it's all about making your foot fit the shoe, tapping into, Cinderella, one of these horrible, patriarchal myths. So it's pretty gruesome. And which leads us to an even more gruesome place, which we're living in now. So we're basically living in the age of porn. These are a couple of books that are, great glimpses kind of into this world. I mean, we know that porn can be extremely destructive on so many levels. But the prostitute aesthetic has basically morphed into the porn star aesthetic. And just look on Instagram. There's some great documentaries on Netflix. This is very, very well known at this point. This is what's happening, and porn is so popular. So, like in 2018 alone, on just one porn site, Pornhub, there were 30 billion visits. And so, contextualizing that, there's only 7.5 billion people on the planet. I mean, our mass media has.
It's like by far, watching porn is by far the highest trafficked anything on the internet. Right?
Oh yeah, completely.
Higher than Google.
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. That's just what people do. And it's become totally normalized. Yeah, in small doses, if you're already in kind of a good place sexually and feeling comfortable and good about yourself, nothing wrong with a little bit of porn, but there's never a little bit of porn, very, very rarely. And it's completely, it's just perpetuating so much destructive imagery. It's causing men to be impotent. It's leading to more violence. And, so our mass media has become totally pornified. And it's really sad because it's starting really young. At this point, at least 1/3 of all clothing for little girls is sexualized. And these images, we're not even talking about like the creepy beauty pageant stuff. I mean, this is just normal clothing for little girls. So Brazilian waxing, basically it's a torture ritual with no purpose except to make you look prepubescent, basically, and get lots of ingrown hairs. And it's awful, and yet it comes right from porn. If you look at the standards now, in terms of grooming.
Wait, okay, so this is waxing being targeted at little girls.
Oh yeah. That ad is actually, it's targeted to women, but we're seeing it even targeted to little girls. During the month of July, so it's like girls 15 and under can enjoy their first waxing experience and find it natural, safe, and pleasant.
That's always the first word I use to describe waxing, pleasant.
Oh, totally. Also really natural, right?
Totally.
Celebrate freedom and independence all July, and the concept of freedom that we should be working towards, freedom to not have to be obsessed with grooming, stripping off our hair. So it's just, and yet this stuff is normalized, stuff like this is everywhere. It's really sad because you think of, these young girls who are taught to believe that hair is somehow evil and bad. And, maybe they don't have access to, to waxing or whatever. And they're like, what's wrong with me? And it's just super sad. So plastic surgery also, this is obviously a huge problem now. Social media has just created this proliferation, it's not just breasts, it's, Brazilian butt lifts and, all kinds of injections and things, we know, for example, with breast implants, they carry all kinds of health risks, but, men love big boobs and that's all they see in these billions of hours of porn that they're watching. So women are all too happy to go under the knife. They do it because it gives them that edge, makes them feel good about themselves. It helps their self-esteem. Another more recent development in plastic surgery is the labiaplasty. So, it's not even enough to look prepubescent by getting this Brazilian wax. Porn has created this whole new revenue stream for plastic surgeons by making women self-conscious for having basically normal labia. There's ads like this, that you see online. So, here's the before and the after, and it's really disturbing that, all this stuff is right on the web. So imagine millions of girls. They're looking at these pictures. They're like, what's happening to my body? It's changing. And they're hating themselves. It's basically, for having normal labia, it's like, oh no, I need surgery, right? So labiaplasties cause all kinds of problems, permanent loss of sensation, all these other surgery complications. But if you look like a porn star, it's all good, right? Look at this guy's expression up there, with this woman. Oh yeah, he's like
elective genital mutilation.
Yeah, exactly. Being totally programmed by basically our pornified culture. And women are buying into it and they're feeling horrible about themselves because, it's all too powerful to look at images and nobody's really telling you anything, anything different. We're just not getting messages across to people. I mean, it's happening. It's absolutely happening. Women are certainly, there's a countercurrent, but this is the mainstream. This is the norm right now that people are seeing, which brings us to this place we're at now. So, 88% of porn at this point contains violence against women, which is, and it's really extreme. This is it's like we haven't evolved at all in the past 7,000 years. It's basically rape culture. And a lot of people, they're going to say, oh, this is just fantasy. It's not doing any harm, right? It's fine. But the reality, if you actually look at statistics on this and real experiences, so a full third of women in the US have experienced domestic violence, and 20% have been raped. This is reality. It's not just fantasy. And you're deluding yourself if you think this is somehow okay to get used to this, to have this become normalized. I mean, it's really, it's brutal, and it needs to stop already, and we internalize all this violent objectification. So, you have Glamour magazine, which is known for its demoralizing airbrush imagery. And they do a survey, that confirms what it shouldn't surprise us at this point. 97% of women will be cruel to their bodies today. And I thought this was great when I was looking at this article, like this ad popped up right next to it. This is basically like the cruelest fetish shoe you could imagine. And the hashtag is
actual shoe.
Well, it's perfume. This is like a perfume that's in a bottle that's stylized to look like this shoe. Yeah. So it's like the hashtag is good to be bad. And so, this is, if we're looking for virgin whore imagery in the media, we don't have to look very hard for this stuff. And this is just what's out there, now with our whole culture of influencers on social media, like this is, it's normalized, and so many young people are looking at this stuff and being programmed with it. And it's just so destructive. We're living in this culture where, image is everything, but it's also everything 24/7 with instantaneous feedbacks, because social media, it's heightened our ability to objectify ourselves and commodify ourselves, to reduce ourselves to an image, just the superficial image. It's so addictive, it's all pervasive, and it's driving us further insane. Basically, it takes advantage of all of our shallowest impulses, and it magnifies our distorted realities into this like crazy mirrored echo chamber of the late capitalist soul. So this is what happens when capitalism is taken to like its logical conclusion. So we become a new kind of slave. It's not like the sex slave anymore, but it's like the narcissistic, hypersexualized zombie. We do this to ourselves. We're perpetuating these cycles. And so, okay, so how do we escape this zombie reality? What do we do here? I've talked a lot about all the negative stuff, and I want to, I'm going to shift gears now into like what we can do, because we're in this place where nobody's connecting with each other. We're not feeling good. And all of our worst habits that we've acquired over these 10,000 years of civilization are still pervading our lives. So how do we reconnect with our ancestral selves, from this amazing time when we were egalitarian and free and connected to our bodies in all their capacity for pleasure and pain and messiness? So what do we do here? How do we ground ourselves again? So we're going to shift now into what we can do to get out of this. And just know, first of all, that this is not straightforward. This is going to take many, many years, many thousands of years, hundreds of years, whatever, who knows how long we even, have as a species, but this is not straightforward. So these are some ways to get started. So first of all, don't forget history. So understand that women are very recently freed slaves. Like we couldn't even vote 100 years ago. So yeah, we have jobs now, we have power now, but we're still expected to be compliant sex objects. And we can't be too loud or shrill or threatening, or we're totally vilified and slapped down. And we've all felt that and heard these stories before. Women are bitches, right? And men are still expected to be warriors. There's this archetype of the warrior. So unfeeling, violent, repressed, numb, not allowed to cry or show vulnerability. And we're living in this competitive winner-take-all system where men don't want to give up power, and they're going to denigrate women at every opportunity when it seems like they're getting too powerful. Witness the last election cycle and what's happening, in the U.S. right now. I mean, it's pretty, you know, a lot of intense negative emotion. So we're still living our lives in this sadomasochistic trance. We've got this major case of Stockholm syndrome. We fall in love with our captors and we internalize what they believe. So that's just, you know, it's a well-known psychological syndrome, and it's what happens. You know, there was a, you know, a bank heist where in Stockholm where people were being held hostage, you know, and some of the women in there like got so obsessed with their captors that they like wanted to marry them afterwards and made all kinds of excuses for them. I mean, it happens. That's just what we do. So we need to go beyond all this shit if we're going to evolve culturally and get back to a real partnership model of living. That's the first thing. Just understand where we are and where we came from. And then understand this critical moment that we're in historically. As we're in this place now where the scripts that have carried us through the past 10,000 years are not serving us anymore. I mean, raping only gets you so far, whether it's raping women, raping the planet. So we've had 10,000 years of runaway violence and domination and resource extraction and accumulation of wealth that have taken us to the verge of complete ecological collapse. This book, The Limits of Growth, is really, you know, I mean, we see the headlines every day, right, with climate change. They 30 years ago mapped the whole thing out. They're like, okay, we can't keep doing this. It's going to get really bad. You know, the climate's heating up, species are going extinct. We've crossed 4 out of the 9 critical planetary thresholds that are basically sending our ecosystem into a tailspin. So in order to make it through, we need to reconsider everything. You know, our bodies, which are so ravaged and so hated, are just a microcosm of what we've done to the planet, to the entire ecosystem. And we need to stop commoditizing ourselves. And we need to stop being a culture of rapists and self-loathing victims. And we need to move back to that loving, egalitarian place we all came from. So it's really all interconnected. You know, what's happening on a personal level is happening on a planetary level. So just understand that we're going through this radical shift right now in history. And it's as big as the shift from the tribal age to the age of empire that was driven by agriculture. So you saw when we moved from the tribal hunter-gatherer to these empires that, you know, that happened 10,000 years ago. And so this shift that's happening right now is just as huge. And there's some people, you know, who are doing the good work, driving the shift ahead, and some people are still way behind. So we're in this really interesting time where, like, you know, some people are, you know, just living on a different planet, it seems, than other people, you know. It's like, we can't sustain this. We have to do something different. Some people, let's just keep doing what we've been doing. So yeah, this book, The Great Turning, is excellent, really spelling out what's happening here. And it's the shift that a lot of us are trying to make out of this empire age and into the planetary age. So if we're going to make it out alive, if we're going to survive as a species at all, we need to understand that we need to move away from this dominator model, you know, dominator, patriarchal, you know, agriculture, dominate the earth, dominate everything, back to a place of partnership and compassion. Basically, we need to recover from the last 10,000 years of civilization. We need to think about a total system and make changes that reflect you know, really deep system level thinking about how we treat ourselves and each other and the entire ecosystem. And it's not as simplistic as saying, let's go back to living in caves and hunting for wild animals. That's not going to be the answer. It's going to be something that taps into that, but looks very different from anything that we even know. And that's the fascinating thing. As some of us are working on these issues and trying to blaze ahead, we have no clue what it's going to look like. This is all new. And that's what makes it so, you know, exciting, terrifying, exciting all at once. But it's, you know, it's definitely not going back nostalgically to some golden age, which, you know, never is not tenable for the future. Too many of us, right? So the first step in really getting out of this mess personally is to recognize that trauma is real. You know, it lives in our minds and bodies, and it puts us in a constant state of fear and anxiety and depression and learned helplessness. And these things don't just go away on their own, especially after all these generations of trauma. So the Me Too movement, what's happening here is that women are finally speaking up. So after thousands of years of rape and assault and harassment, you know, we're saying, wait, this is not cool. So, you know, it's great that we finally feel safe enough to speak up. And it's really important that all this abuse that's unspoken about is finally airing, finally being talked about. But so the question is, okay, let's acknowledge it. Let's get it out there. Let's talk about it as much as we need to. And then what do we do? So there are 2 crucial pieces, and we need to take them on both at once. We need to process trauma and we need to transcend it. fortunately, there's a lot of ways to deal with the impact of trauma on the body-mind. There's some really promising research out there with MDMA, ecstasy, ayahuasca, psilocybin, a lot of the theogenic plant medicine can help dramatically, working with a psychologist, especially, rather than trying to do it, muscle it through on your own. A lot of other powerful ways to get past trauma are Kundalini yoga, somatic experiencing, which is a therapeutic modality, and EFT, ecstatic dance. Trauma really lives in every cell of your body. This book, The Mind Body Code, is really life-changing. It can really help with some reprogramming,
I've had this book for 6 months, and I opened it, started reading it, and then I put it down, and I probably should pick it up and keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really incredible. Yeah, I saw him talk at a conference and I was like, whoa, okay. The way he's bridging together, sort of really deep, rigorous neuroscientific information and understanding with first person experience and giving us some tools that we can start to implement like right now in reading the book. It's super powerful. So yeah, we really need to process things very, very deeply, and that's critical. And this is a lifetime, right? This isn't just something that happens overnight. The ideal is that we start engaging, we do whatever is right for us, given a time. We're continually working on it. But as we're doing this deep processing, it's really important also to not get caught in victim traps. Because we can let trauma hold us back from living. It's definitely something that happens. Now, sometimes we might be too PTSD to even function, and that's legit. That might be the case, but we can also let it hold us back. So the idea is to not identify with trauma. It's not my trauma. It's something that happened, but let it go as much as possible. It's really healthy to have righteous anger. But it's even healthier if you can get to this point where you're feeling unconditional love for everybody and everything. And that sounds woo-woo and Pollyanna, but it's a shift that can happen gradually over time. The reality is that there are always going to be assaults on us. As long as we're alive on this chaotic planet, we're going to have large assaults, small assaults every single day. And the more we can develop resilience, the happier and more comfortable we're going to be, and the more we can thrive personally. That's super important. Don't reinvent the patriarchy. So I alluded to this earlier. So women are really angry right now, rightfully so. But if we're going to get back to a place of egalitarianism, it doesn't help matters to demonize and exclude men. Men and boys are struggling enough right now. So, this book is great, Why Boys Fail. I mean, it's rough out there for everyone in lots of different ways, and so the lesson we should have learned from all these 7,000 years of patriarchy is that privileging one sex over another is a recipe for disaster. So, it's not about the future is female. I really get frustrated when I see this imagery because to me, it stems from an incomplete understanding of what we need to do to really get to a good future. The future isn't female or male, it's egalitarian. It's all of us together, not talking, not being all about these differences between us. So we really need to educate ourselves and others about media ecology. So what's media ecology at all? So this is about all the effects of all the information that's put out there on our mental environment. So think about what happens to us every day. We're bombarded with thousands of words and images and videos, and they have this effect on us. I mean, we are what we consume. We are what we look at and listen to. That's just what creates us. And there are serious effects of that. It's not neutral. So we need to become really sophisticated media consumers and look behind everything we see. So consider for everything, who's putting it out there? Who's funding it? What do they care about? And what are they trying to manipulate me into thinking or doing or buying? So in this Orwellian age, we can't take anything at face value at all. And so this image, is pretty powerful. It's all about what media ecologists call the male gaze. So, most of the images we see in media are filtered through this empire age male worldview. They objectify women and give dignity to men. You see, the men, it's their face, they're wearing a suit, they've got all this gravitas, and women are, sexualized, showing as much skin as possible, having these sort of flirtatious, deferential postures, and we don't think anything of it, but it's what we see. all the time. So Laura Mulvey was a historian who she was the one who coined the term the male gaze. In a world ordered by sexual imbalance, pleasure in looking has been split between active male and passive female. So the determining male gaze projects its fantasy on the female figure, which is styled accordingly. And we internalize all this stuff without even realizing it. If you look at, what's hanging on the walls of like major museums, hardly any of the artists are female, but you're looking at these nudes of women. That's just kind of what we're used to. You look online, you're looking for clothes or whatever, so here's the same shirt. You've got this dude and he's standing with a plaid shirt looking like a person in a shirt. And then, of course, why not have a woman and she's, showing half her boobs and she's wearing underwear. And it's just like, okay, that's the kind of stuff we're used to. Total double standard, but we don't really balk at that. And people are starting to question that. Like this is, some interesting, imagery that was created to really show like, hold on, there's something off kilter here. You look at the woman and, you don't even think, you think, oh, whatever. Okay. Yeah. She's looking sexy there. And you see a man in the same pose and it's like, wow, that's somehow wrong. What's wrong with him? He's off. And it's like, hold on a second. Why do we not feel the same thing about the woman? Well, it's because of, all the history I've talked about and the male gaze and what we expect from women and from men. And you can see that, put men in the same postures that women are in, kind of coy and deferential and flirty, and they look somehow just weird and off. Hold on a second. My Mac is telling me it's going to shut down. If we could just pause this for just, yeah. Yeah. So, you see these men in these postures that, we don't think twice about seeing women in these postures, but it really, it underscores how deeply the male gaze is embedded in us when you look at this and think, wait, this is off kilter. And why should it be, why should it be acceptable for women to be in these postures and not men? So on that note, do everything you can to avoid looking at hypersexualized images. So what does hypersexualized even mean? So if you've heard of hyperpalatable food that basically messes with our palates and our bodies because it's basically more sweet and salty and fatty than anything in nature. Hypersexualized images mess with our heads, basically drive us to want cosmetic surgery and make us feel awful about ourselves. And so whether we're looking at porn or what's called fitspiration or photoshopped images in mainstream media, whatever it is, it's all destructive to our well-being. So many studies show that people's self-esteem is going to plummet after looking at this sort of stuff. And all this porn is creating an epidemic of impotence in young men. So we have this innate tendency to compare ourselves to others. And in this age of social media, it's going to drive us totally insane if we don't control our media diet. We are what we consume. So, for me, I do dip into social media. I find it, it can be a really useful, powerful way of keeping up with people who are doing cool things in the world. But like, if I see images that are hypersexualized, I'm like, unfollow. I'm not looking at this again. And you can cultivate, you can curate what you look at. It's amazing. We're in an age where we can control this stuff. And it's really just like, do everything you can to avoid it because it's just not healthy for you. It's like junk food. The other side of this, avoid hypersexualizing your own appearance. So rather than going for some impossible ideal, embrace wabi-sabi, which is this really cool Japanese philosophy that says that everything is imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. And it celebrates the beauty of imperfection, and it's so liberating. So ask yourself, when you're going shopping for shoes or reaching for lipstick, ask yourself, whose vision am I participating in? Is this really my own vision, or am I doing it because I've learned to be eye candy for someone else? We've seen in the last few years, the no makeup hashtag has definitely gotten some traction, and it's really refreshing to see. It's scary, for those of us who have worn makeup for a number of years to step out without that, but it's so incredibly liberating. I thought this was just hysterical. If you guys aren't following Reductress, it's like The Onion, but sort of takes on, it has a biting feminist edge. And it's like, I don't wear makeup for men. I wear it because I love supporting corporations. And so, it's totally mocking, first of all, obviously women are, wearing it for men. Nobody's sitting around their house by themselves with a full face of makeup on. You just would not want to do that, and so it's like, so it's taking down, the whole mindset plus, it's a jab at, consumer capitalism. Obviously, no one wants to support corporations either, but that's pretty much what you're doing. So don't fall into the choice trap. And this is a really subtle one. This is something that takes years to deprogram ourselves from. It's an ongoing process. And so what is this? This is really key. These are the Stepford wives. So this is a lot broader than just personal appearance. So whenever you make a decision, you might think, oh yeah, this is my choice. But if every choice that we make, or a lot of our choices, are making us look and act like every single other person out there, maybe it's not really our choice. Our cultural programming goes really, really deep, and our brains don't do a very good job of differentiating between what we want and what the dominant cultural scripts have programmed us to do. So be super, super careful about that, really considering, is this really my choice?
Well, you know what's crazy about it, it just, as I'm even looking at this image, is just thinking about what would be the need from an evolutionary perspective to do this to ourselves. It is the idea that we need men for our sustenance, to pay for our lives, that we need men to be able to procreate. I mean, that makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint. And that, then this is a sort of separate topic, but then women, and this is something that I do talk about, how women become competition for one another as opposed to being inside of sisterhood. But it makes sense that we would do these things to ourselves until it begins to be truly culturally accepted to choose another path. Because it really, for women, has been about survival.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. This goes back to, the early days of being in the workforce. You need to do whatever you can just to survive, just to get that advantage, just to say, okay, I can get a salary. And if I have to do all these things, to play this game, I'm going to do it. So yeah, it's not easy to get out of this. And it makes total sense why we would be still taking part in these systems. So it's often small steps to try to get out of that, because culture does not reward us for stepping out. On the contrary, it can be pretty harsh.
Yeah.
So dress for movement, comfort, and health. This is a big shift. We know that constant movement is really important for health, so dress for it. So, even if your work is really sedentary, we need to be able to move throughout the day. So, if you can't do like 10 burpees effortlessly in whatever you're wearing at any given moment, it's probably not what you should be wearing, except for, extreme situations, so you see things like, Beta Brand has dress pant, yoga pants. You definitely, there are options. People are starting to move away from like really uncomfortable clothing. And as we're doing that, also think about the health, not just of yourself, but of the planet. Hold yourself to really high standards. So you see Pact, they have, everything's organic. So it's organic and no sweatshops, no child labor. So, don't buy anything new unless it's, used clothing, vintage, go for it. But then if it's new, make sure that it's clean and has no toxins, no slave labor, Vivo Barefoot. There's so many shoes right now that are like super comfortable, that are just a total paradigm shift. So really just think about comfort. I mean, it's happening anyway. If you notice, there's all these dialogue about yoga pants and leggings. Are they appropriate? People have stopped wearing jeans as much just because they're not comfortable, right? Jeans are the classic, like, it's a prison. Can I fit into my jeans? But you can always fit into your yoga pants. So, it's happening. The shift is happening, but I would say let's just really consider for everything we wear, is this comfortable? Is this healthy? And if not, don't do it. Reconnect with nature. So, talking about the planet, we really need to reconnect in a deep, visceral way. And so one of the reasons we're so alienated from our bodies is that we spend so much time in a sterile, controlled, artificial environment. And our psyche, our soul starts to reflect this environment. So get outside as much as possible. Sleep outside, get dirty, get wet, get hot and cold, and really start to feel the mud and the grass, and the dirt against your skin. It's a really, really healthy thing. Get comfortable with nudity. And this is, taboo for some people. All the religious stuff comes into play, but look how comfortable these people are in this picture. It's just beautiful. They're not in sexualized postures. They're just themselves. Yeah, so the Empire Age scripts say, oh, nudity is bad, it's sinful, it's gross. So we need to get over this as soon as possible. The human body is not a sex object. It's just flesh. We need to get over our modesty and our squeamishness. And this is something that takes many, many years to do, but, do whatever you can. Take steps, get naked, whether it's at home, if you can get to nude beaches or hot springs, your own yard, even, if you're hiking someplace that feels safe and comfortable, it's amazing. Full body sunlight is really, really good for our health, and the freedom it's really what we need for our soul. Just to do, let's just get comfortable here. Go on a mirror fast. So mirrors are a really new thing in human history. If you think of historically, if we had to look into a pond if we wanted to see our face. For most of all of history. And then until the 1800s, mirrors were really expensive. They were these luxury goods that only a few people had. So now we've got mirrors everywhere, and we've got our phones, as cameras, and it's all messing with our heads. It focuses us on our outward appearance, and it encourages all this obsessive preening and grooming, and makes us feel worse about ourselves because these mirrors allow us to scrutinize ourselves way more than is healthy. So just try this as an experiment. Cover all your mirrors with paper. Don't check yourself out in any other mirrors that you encounter. You can have a small mirror if you want to check your teeth for whatever. Put in contact lenses, just basic level stuff to feel okay in the world. Let it all go. Forget about selfies. Don't check yourself out on your phone. And do this. Try to do this for a month. It's really, really hard to do this. You'll see how you want to look at yourself, but it is so liberating to do this. If you can get yourself into this vibe, it's just this feeling of just complete freedom, and it's amazing. So transcend gender stereotypes, and this was some of the stuff that we were talking about before, Camille, when we went on the sideline from Darwin. And Cordelia Fine, she's written a couple of books and articles about this whole concept of how basically neurosexism, saying that men and women are different from one another because of our brains and all this stuff. There's so much junk science out there, and we have to be really, really careful. So get educated about what where it's useful to talk about differences and where it can actually be destructive and wrong, and try to go beyond gender stereotypes. Men are, women are. Let's just not even talk about that. It's about humans. We see some cultural progress. Finally, Target is not labeling toys for boys or for girls. There was a huge uproar when that happened. Some people are like, yes, finally, about time. Other people are like, oh no, this is the downfall of civilization. So a lot of people are sticking their heels in the mud here. And I see, and this is just a funny thing, how to tell if a toy is for boys or girls. Like, okay, do you operate the toy with your genitalia? If yes, it's probably not for kids. If no, it's for either girls or boys. That's the only criterion we should have, rather than having pink things. And being pregnant, I'm just like seeing through new lenses just how gendered the world is, even before a baby is born. And then when they start getting clothes and toys, and there's a lot of studies, that book I showed you before, a lot of studies that go into just how destructive this is. Girls are supposed to be beautiful and dainty, and boys are strong. And, it's just like it gets perpetuated from day one, and it's not healthy. Even now, even in more enlightened circles, I see a lot of people talking about the divine feminine or the awakened masculine. And, when we start dividing like this, it's not necessarily helpful. We need to think, okay, in all of us, there is the quote feminine and masculine, if we even want to use these labels, or if we want to go beyond Jungian archetypes and say we all have many forces within us, and we're these amazing multidimensional creatures, and let's honor and be multidimensional in as much as we can, but let's not try to segregate, because segregation and division aren't really going to be helpful for us moving into the future. So what is the future?
Can I say something?
Absolutely, yeah.
Going back to that divine feminine script, and it's perfect that we're talking about this today as I am, writing copy. But, the site, like looking at, I do think about things more sometimes in terms of masculine traits and feminine traits, and and even, you know, thinking about infusing that into, you know, some of this messaging of the school. But to me, and I am curious, really curious to know your thoughts about this, like, because we have had such an uplifting in, you know, this whole history of traits that are more commonly known as masculine, that I know for myself, I really took on that my masculine gifts were the ones that were valuable and not nurturing my feminine gifts within, right? So there's, as just a baseline. And so a lot of what I am seeking to do with the School of Inner Beauty is to help women get connected to or reconnected to some of these feminine gifts, you know, the things that just are, you know, compassion and nurturing and interconnectivity. And, you know, when you do look, because there are labels, like you said, that we use to define what is feminine and what is masculine. Again, not because one is better than the other, but because we've been so steeped in our value coming from our masculine gifts that the feminine can be repressed. And so, like with this course that I am, you know, looking to create this in this coming year, it's about embracing one's feminine gifts, and it is for women who have been ambitious and driven, maybe really successful in the workforce, but, you know, burnt out and overcompensating and just done with this whole way of being that is not honoring to their feminine gifts. And, you know, when I see a return of the divine feminine, and it's an interesting balance, but to me, it is about coming to honor the gifts of the feminine and actually focus on the honoring of the gifts of the feminine, because it's been, our society and women have been so parched.
Mm-hmm.
What do you, that's my sort of take on that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it depends on the lens that you're seeing this through. I mean, when anybody can have the feminine within them, anyone can have the masculine within them. To me, as long as we understand that when we talk about these, we're just talking about labels. We're not talking about men and women per se, but we're talking more about qualities.
Right.
Then that's fine. But, you know, when you start talking about feminine being more nurturing and holistic and compassionate and sensitive, whereas the masculine is more logic-based and rational, you know, they're terms for talking about a cluster of traits that, you know, you could map on to a specific sex, but I don't know that we need to. For me, yes, we need to acknowledge that, you know, in all these years of patriarchy, there's been a lot that's been suppressed and kept down and not celebrated. And we totally need to bring that out. And that is, you know, it has to do with a lot that, you know, women can offer. But I think in our ideal future, which we're totally not in, not only would we acknowledge, let's bring all this feminine stuff to the fore, but it's not about women. It's about being a balanced person.
Yes.
You need to have all of this stuff. So I think as long as we're conscious about how we're using these terms, we're not talking about women and men, we're talking about traits that we all need to embody and embrace, then I think we're totally good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
It is an interesting, and it is important to really create, as you know, as somebody who is seeking to support women in this, like, to make sure that you really do have your terms, not making assumptions about the terms, because I am in full agreement that, you know, there's definitely a way that it's easy when we have swung so far in one direction for, to just want to swing all the way to the opposite. And that's a lot of what feminism has become. Mm-hmm. And there is righteous indignation about how women have been wronged. And there's certainly, you just finished this whole amazing presentation showing that this in fact is true. But in my belief, it is, I'm in total agreement with you that it's about us. It's about us coming into balance.
For sure. Sure.
And men coming and having space to awaken that feminine nature within them as well. It's certainly not just about women. It is about valuing the gifts that we label as feminine.
Yeah, exactly.
Across the whole society.
Yeah. And understanding everyone's entry points are different, and respecting, if you're just trying to come into your own as a woman and this is really useful. I cringe at a lot of kind of goddess language, but that might be where you need to be at a particular time, and then go for it if that's going to help you through some stuff. And then later on, we can realize we're all earthly and divine at the same time. And, maybe language like that is kind of, distancing from our earthy selves, but, whatever helps us get through this weird time. It's certainly a step forward. In the ideal world, I'd love to see us, kind of even get beyond these, the binary like that. And, and to that end, we're seeing some really interesting stuff now in terms of gender fluidity being embraced by younger people. Gen Z, if you look at their attitudes, it's completely different. Younger people are like, they're leaving the gender binary behind. It's not even about men or women, and it's freaking people out. Oh my God, pronouns, what do we call you? Are you a man or a woman? It's like, if you spend time with younger people, in schools or other communities, it's just not even relevant. Time magazine, this is like the most mainstream publication, is running this stuff. So you have at this point, Tinder's got like 40 options for gender, Facebook, has 70. And so we're really moving to this future. What I'm envisioning is, people are really flexible and egalitarian. And so we're moving beyond a strict binary, which is really healthy. And in lots of cultures, more traditional cultures, you even see there are third genders, there's a place for people who are trans and fluid. And there's just a lot more fluidity in general. And we've been in this very rigid sort of dominator patriarchal place for a long time, but it's really finally starting to shift, which is fantastic. You see brands coming out now for kids and for adults, like Wild Fang, that are totally blurring these lines. They're not buying into the gendered stuff. They're not sexualizing. And it's just really cool to see this shift happening.
What do you think this means for procreation?
I think that, we're in trouble from a fertility perspective as a culture. If you look at the stats, a third of all couples are having trouble conceiving, sperm counts are plummeting. I think we've got so many problems procreating as a culture that kind of override whatever.
Plastic, GMO. Yeah,
plastics, all of it completely. And so, I think people will, I think that generally, sort of biologically, most of us still kind of fall into a more, it'd be kind of clear maybe what's between your legs and what your reproductive, system is. Also, there's all these other technologies. I've plenty of friends who, are, 2 men, 2 women, they're having a kid. It's like, I think we're just in a place that's a lot more fluid. And the bigger question is, are we heading toward the Handmaid's Tale scenario where hardly anyone can reproduce? Some strange retro thing gets imposed on us. But, I think more fluidity is better and more openness is certainly better. And, people who can have kids biologically, they'll still be doing it. So I'm not too concerned there.
And I guess probably from a evolution or from a perspective of overpopulation.
Yeah, exactly. We're, there should be like 1 billion people on this planet now. We're 7 billion. So yeah, I'm not particularly worried about population growth because, the fewer people, the better in a sense. stop using violent domination language. And this is one of these huge topics. I'm just going to talk about it for a minute. But we don't even really think about the degree to which all this like patriarchal empire age stuff has infused our language. But we use words all the time like, I'm going to crush life, you know, I'm going to dominate, I'm going to slay. And this stuff, it's really not helpful for us. You know, we need to, if we're going to move to this egalitarian place, we need to watch the words we use and the thoughts behind them. Even the idea of winning and losing, if you start looking behind that, that's not, you know, they're not helpful. It's really not helpful to frame things in this way at all. So, you know, really look at your language, look at your words, and try to, you know, sort of, decolonize your language, and it'll affect the way we think about things as well. Embrace tantra, not sadomasochism. So I talked before about our sexual programming is basically sadomasochistic. You know, tantra, it's not about sex. I mean, it can be, but it's really about an entire way of living. So what tantra is, you know, it's about living deeply connected to yourself and to others, and learning to be totally alive and ecstatic in every moment, no matter what you're doing. So a tantric approach to living, it's intrinsically loving and expansive, recognizes that we're all interconnected. So obviously we're not going to shift ourselves overnight, right? We've been programmed with sadomasochism for 7,000 years, but the more that we can reprogram ourselves into this open, expansive, loving, present place, the better. And on that note, be kind and compassionate. You know, as we go through this process of massive change, be easy on yourself and everybody else. This change is going to be hard, and it's going to take hundreds, if not thousands of years. So we're these weird hybrid creatures right now. We've got one foot firmly rooted in the empire age, and we're stepping like gingerly into this whole new place. So don't shame others who aren't woke enough yet, and don't shame yourself for not being as woke as you should be. There's no shoulds here. The reality of our culture is that we're still living in this harsh empire age environment with these harsh scripts, and it's not really practical or possible to change everything all at once. And also really understand, and this gets back to kind of the feminine stuff, understand that being kind and compassionate is not a sign of weakness. It's not about being feminine. You know, let's move beyond the labels like feminine or masculine. It's about being human. And these are qualities that we need to have if we're going to make it as a species. All of us need to have. Stop thinking that your value is in your appearance. A lot of you have probably seen this Dove commercial. Basically, women have to decide which door to walk through. You're going to walk through the beautiful doors or the average doors. And it's all, you know, the Dove is trying to say, well, but most women don't describe themselves as beautiful. That's really tragic. 96% of women are walking through the average door. Oh, this is so sad. But I would say the real problem isn't that they're walking through the average door. Yeah, that's part of the problem, but also that we're really fixated on beauty as the highest value, external beauty. And so this is really hard to overcome. You know, it's not just the patriarchal culture tells us our value is linked to our appearance. You know, millions of years of evolution have wired us this way, selecting, you know, mates based on physical characteristics. So we're kind of wired this way on some level. And to get beyond this, we need to take serious personal growth, you know, and get this personal growth happening among a critical mass of people. And so how do we get there? Well, this is pretty intense and advanced, and, you know, something I, you know, have worked on for a long time. Still not there, but it's something that we ultimately need to get to if we're going to really feel at peace. So stop thinking about value at all. So, you know, step one is to understand that your value is not in your physical appearance, right? It's in deeper things, your creativity and intellect and skills, sense of humor, integrity, all that stuff that makes you you. And then step two is to go even further. Your value is not in your physical appearance, but it's not in your creativity or your intellect or your skills or any of that. You're much bigger than all of that. And nobody has the right to judge or evaluate you at all. Stop thinking about value and understand, sort of in a bigger picture way, in a more cosmic sense, you're a force of nature. You're this intricate outcome of billions of years of evolution. It's miraculous. It's insanely magical. You've inherited brain systems and cultural scripts and all this stuff. And right now you're on this planet at this moment of time, and you're conscious and you're alive and you're able to feel. And that's more beautiful and miraculous than anything else. Okay, so this is the formal part of the presentation. This is, by the way, the book that I'm working on now. If you'd like information about when it's going to come out and updates and stuff, you can sign up for my newsletter at hilarybromberg.com. Feel free to reach out to me, email me, hilary@eggbrandy.com. I know we're going to have a follow-up session in a couple days, but beyond that, I'm totally accessible. I know there's a lot of stuff in here to think about. So wait, the fuck, yeah.
Let me ask you a question on this note. Do you,
totally, yeah.
I don't know if I follow you on Instagram. I actually don't. I'm actually trying to get more into Instagram because I've been so turned off by it because of a lot of what you already spoke of, but I'm just learning that it is a tool for self-expression and I can guide it as I will. But how do you use Instagram, or do you?
I do use Instagram. Basically, I use it as, I was living in New York City for a long time. I've lived in LA, and I love going to galleries and art and just being exposed to cultural stuff that's really awesome, right? Because there's a lot of beautiful, amazing stuff out there. And so I use Instagram as a way of, and now, it's not just galleries, it's people doing amazing things all over the world, and friends of mine or people, acquaintances, people I'd like to meet. So I use Instagram as a way of, I don't go on every day. Sometimes a week will go by and I won't, I'll dip in, sometimes, moments like if I'm, catching a flight or whatever, like sort of odd moments, or, just sort of feeling kind of tired or whatever, just, sort of just dipping in and seeing what's there. And I'm very conscious about who I follow. And if I meet someone who's really super cool and has interesting stuff going on, I'm going to follow them and just be able to keep up, because all this cool, planetary age stuff that's happening, we all need to sort of be interconnected. So it's a really good way of being connected. I don't personally post a lot on there. Well, every so often. For me, the criterion is like, if I see something, if there's something that I find just really beautiful or stimulating, I'll post that just to try to create more beauty and interesting stuff in the world. I don't use it aggressively as a marketer. I guess I do too much of that, and, in my professional life, like to me, it's a very pure expression, but I think it can actually be really useful, to keep up with things. So yeah, I'm, Hilary Bromberg, on Instagram, you can find me there for sure.
I have one more question from your, since you are in marketing and you've just done such an excellent job with, just showing us the what's behind it all. How does and this might be too big of a question, but just in a couple sentences, how does one succeed in marketing without exploitation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the way I like to frame that is just by, first of all, acknowledging that all marketers are propagandists. Anyone who's doing marketing is by nature a propagandist, but you can have propaganda for good and you can have propaganda for bad. And if we're trying to communicate something that's, net positive in the world, that we believe is net positive, put it out there. Don't feel guilty about it. Just say, okay, I need to spread this, but I'm aware that it's propaganda and this is just what I'm doing. I mean, unfortunately, just given how the world is, how many of us there are, how disconnected we are, we need to do these things sometimes in order to communicate what we're doing. So,
not hooking people in. I mean, I'm even looking at some of the marketing I did for the School of Inner Beauty 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. It was unintentional, but it was showing people. I mean, we've been in the paleo space. I mean, how much do we show people our before and after pictures?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Hey, come join me in this thing, the School of Inner Beauty. And P.S., it is inner work, but you'll probably end up feeling and looking more beautiful afterwards.
Yeah.
And I used that.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, the reality is, we know people want to lose weight and they want to be beautiful. That taps into us on, on a very, very base level, and ignoring that would be, it would be to your detriment to do that. Even though we realize that the change, it's about internal change, and what happens as, kind of a side effect of that is just a bonus.
Yeah.
So I think it's, it's a matter of just being, kind of being mindful about what we're communicating and realizing that, okay, sometimes we have to do this to get the word out. And, it can feel manipulative, but just as long as we're honest with ourselves about what we're doing, and sometimes to have an impact, you have to do those things.
Tell them what they want and give them what they need.
Yeah. Exactly. So, yeah. So, I think that a good way of integrating, there's a lot of material I covered, and a way that I like to think about all this stuff is I look back at myself. Where was I 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and all the changes I've made? And if you looked at a picture of me 20 years ago, I'm, unrecognizable. How much makeup I wore, and what I was doing to my hair and my eyebrows, and even more than that, energetically, I'm alive now after having spent so much time in nature and doing a lot of yoga and meditation and work on myself. And if you looked at me 20 years ago, I would just look dead and scared and self-conscious, even though I had a mask on, of makeup and hair and clothing, all that stuff. So, for me, it's been a huge shift, many, many little things, big things all along the years. Getting sunlight, getting sun on your skin is a huge one. So I think a way to start integrating this is really think about, maybe in the past 10 to 20 years, what of some of the things that we've talked about here have you shifted from? And some of it can be, maybe getting out of toxic relationships. That's part of it too. Recognizing our own worth and value and getting out of patriarchal situations. Even though it can be very hard, especially if we grew up with that as a model. We find ourselves, being with the same kind of person in relationships, making some of the same problems. So, it can be on a very, on a more skin level. It can be on a deep personal level or relationships. There are a lot of ways, the work that we do, the play that we do, it really impacts everything. But how can we look back? I like to just look back at myself and say, okay, how have I changed? And that's the only way I can know that I'm growing. So look back at yourself, really think about what you've grown beyond in the past 10 to 20 years. And then think about what you'd like to really implement in the next 5 years. What do you want to work on now? And then what are some of the barriers to change? How will you overcome them? Or maybe you can't. Maybe you're in a career right now where you have to be doing certain things, but maybe you're looking beyond that and saying, okay, if I do this for a certain amount of time, then I can shift, or I can make changes within this environment, however small, to feel better and, feel comfortable.
I appreciate you using such broad time frames, and being that most of the time it's like, well, what are we going to do in the next week, the next month, but what this conversation is so much about. I mean, this is deep unprogramming.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It happens internally and in our society at large. Completely.
Even 5 years, let's say 5 to 10, 15 to 20, where would you like to be? What's your, I don't even like the word goal, but kind of what would you like to expand into? Mm-hmm. Where would you like to grow? Where would you like to see shifts? And then know that these things happen over a long period of time. And we got to be gentle and kind and loving, love yourself right now. It's a cliche, but it's so true. Like, where you are right now is exactly where you need to be. And everyone has a different journey. And just sort of, what would you like that journey to feel like? What would you like to feel like moving into the future?
Yeah. This was awesome. This was super powerful. It would have been nice if we would have been able to work this out to have it at the very beginning of the program. We will be able to do that with the digital course, but this is really foundational. This is foundational stuff.
Cool.
It's very, very awesome. Hilary, thank you so much for your time and for all of the thought and the work and the research that you have put into this conversation. I mean, this is cutting edge stuff.
Cool. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I'm excited just to, discuss, communicate, help people become alive to all of this.
Yeah. Here, I'm still here. Let's see if I can end. Continue. Pop that off. No, cancel. I want to get. I was trying to bring myself back on the screen, but it's not working.
Oh,
right
okay.
now. And I have to go pick up my son.
Okay.
So, we will connect with you on Thursday night, get questions answered, and yeah, we'll see. Thank you everybody for listening, and thank you again, Hilary, for your time. And we'll see you guys next time.
Cool.
Bye,
Thanks a lot.
everybody.
Bye.
Stop.